Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had millions of fans. But what if we told you his love life was full of secrets that even his biggest followers never knew? Behind the dazzling stage lights and swooning crowds, Elvis's romantic life was anything but ordinary. And some of the details, they're downright shocking. Did you know that before his wedding, Elvis faced a heartbreaking moment that nearly changed everything? Or that Priscilla Presley, the woman who became his wife, was just 14 years old when they first met? Their controversial love story is still debated today, but she wasn't the only woman in his life. Far from it. Linda Thompson, the beauty queen who dated Elvis after his marriage ended, revealed intimate details about their relationship that might just change the way you see him forever. Was she the love of his life, or just another chapter in a long line of romances? From forbidden love to heartbreaking goodbyes, the real story behind Elvis's relationships is deeper and more complicated than most people realize. Get ready, because we're diving into the untold truth of Elvis Presley's secret love life, and trust us, you won't believe some of these shocking facts. Their love story began in a foreign land, far from the fame and adoration of Elvis's fans. A story of innocence and youth, of overwhelming love and crippling doubts. A marriage that began with hope but ended in the harsh reality of heartbreak. This is the true story of their relationship. A journey of highs and lows, of devotion and pain. A love story that was never quite as perfect as the world made it out to be. Priscilla Presley was just 14 years old when she first set foot on the military base in West Germany. It was the summer of 1959, a time of new beginnings, uncertainty, and the promise of a fresh start. Her father, an Air Force officer, had been transferred there, and the Presley family was setting up a new life in an unfamiliar country. But it wasn't just the military base that would shape her future, it was the presence of one man, Elvis Presley. Elvis, drafted into the Army in 1958, had been stationed in Germany. Life as a soldier was drastically different from the rock and roll stardom he was used to, but his fame still hung over him. Priscilla was unaware that her path was about to cross with his in a way that would change both of their lives forever. Priscilla was a shy young girl, recently crowned Queen of Del Valle Junior High, but she felt out of place in this new setting. As she arrived in Germany with her family, the excitement and fear of change weighed heavily on her. It wasn't long before she was introduced to Elvis thanks to a mutual connection, Curry Grant, a fellow Air Force member who was stationed at the base. Priscilla was nervous. She had never met a celebrity before, let alone the king of rock and roll. The idea that someone like Elvis Presley would even acknowledge her felt unreal. Priscilla remembers that moment clearly. Elvis immediately caught her off guard. Rather than treating her like a fan, he treated her with kindness and attention. He played songs for her on his piano and even introduced her to his beloved grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley. The way Elvis made her feel special left a lasting impression on her. In her autobiography, Elvis and Me, Priscilla shared how she felt both overwhelmed and enchanted by the attention. The initial meeting lasted much longer than expected, and by the time she finally returned home, it was already 2 a.m. Despite how late it was, Priscilla found herself falling in love with this charismatic man. Elvis, in return, was immediately drawn to her. They shared several conversations over the next few days, and Elvis even called to arrange another meeting. However, Priscilla was not the only one on Elvis's mind. At the time, Elvis was also seeing a 19-year-old German woman named Elizabeth Stefania. Their relationship had been developing since late 1958, just before Priscilla came into the picture. While Priscilla was falling for Elvis, Stefania was becoming increasingly jealous of her presence in Elvis's life. Priscilla, aware of the tension but unable to fully grasp the complexities of Elvis's personal life, was completely enchanted by the attention he gave her. In Elvis and Me, she reflects on how Elvis made her feel important and special, something she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't long before she was caught up in the whirlwind of Elvis's world. As their relationship blossomed, Priscilla quickly found herself caught in a tumultuous, high-pressure world she hadn't anticipated. The life of an Army brat was already full of challenges, but dating one of the most famous musicians in the world added a whole new level of difficulty. In Elvis and Me, Priscilla described the constant whirlwind of Elvis's life. There were moments when she would travel with him, only to find herself overwhelmed by the excitement of being surrounded by his entourage and the constant media attention. She was still so young, and while she loved being close to Elvis, she didn't always know how to handle the demands of his lifestyle. During Christmas of 1962, Priscilla went to visit Elvis for a quick holiday reunion. Since they had limited time together, they tried to make the most of it by cramming in as many activities as possible. In one instance, Elvis gave Priscilla 2 large red pills to help her relax, but the result was far from what either of them expected. She ended up passing out for 2 days, completely knocked out by the drugs Elvis had given her. This was the second time Priscilla had used drugs with Elvis. Earlier that summer, she had accompanied him to Las Vegas, where she felt pressured to keep up with his frenetic lifestyle. In her autobiography, she described how she began taking amphetamines and sleeping pills just to stay awake and participate in the whirlwind that was Elvis's life. For Priscilla, adjusting to the speed of Elvis's world was no easy feat. There were times when she struggled to balance the excitement with the overwhelming exhaustion. Despite the chaos, she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, continuing her education while seeing Elvis almost every night. In Elvis and Me, she recalls how hard it was to focus on her schoolwork after a night spent with him. Her thoughts were consumed with him, and she found it nearly impossible to concentrate. In 1963, after Priscilla's family moved back to the United States, she persuaded her parents to let her move to Memphis to be closer to Elvis. She was still a teenager, just beginning high school, but her relationship with Elvis was already taking up much of her attention. Every night they would stay out until the early hours of the morning, and Priscilla would barely have a few hours of sleep before she had to get up for school. Priscilla recalls in Elvis and Me that her grades suffered as a result. She found it difficult to balance the demands of being Elvis's girlfriend with her schoolwork, but despite the struggle, she was willing to endure it all just to spend more time with him. For Priscilla, being close to Elvis was worth the sacrifices she made. As Priscilla and Elvis's relationship continued, it became more apparent that their connection was deeply complicated. Priscilla was in love, but there were issues that Elvis had not yet revealed to her. One of those issues was his continuing relationship with Elizabeth Stefania. As their relationship progressed, Priscilla couldn't ignore the growing distance between them, a distance caused not only by Elvis's relationship with others, but also by the increasing pressures of fame and the toll it was taking on his personal life. In her autobiography, Priscilla speaks candidly about how challenging it was to adjust to life with Elvis, how she began to question his feelings for her, and how she was slowly starting to realize that the man she was falling in love with wasn't quite the man she had imagined. As the months passed, Priscilla Beaulieu found herself increasingly entrenched in Elvis Presley's world, a world far removed from the simplicity of her teenage years. What began as a whirlwind romance fueled by Elvis's charm and the magic of rock and roll fame was quickly evolving into something more complex and, at times, overwhelming. By 1963, Priscilla had made the difficult decision to move to Memphis, Tennessee to be closer to Elvis. She was just 17, still attending high school, but her life had already taken on a different rhythm. She was no longer just a high school student trying to navigate adolescence. She was the girlfriend of Elvis Presley, a young woman caught up in the frenzy of a superstar's life. Though she was living in Elvis's world, she still had to live her own life as a teenager. Between attending school and spending time with Elvis, it felt like there was no time for her to breathe. She was constantly trying to balance the two worlds. In Elvis and Me, Priscilla reflects on how difficult this balance was to maintain. I was torn between being a typical teenager and being Elvis's girlfriend, she wrote. It was hard to keep up with my schoolwork knowing that my thoughts were always consumed with Elvis. At the time, Priscilla wasn't just a spectator in Elvis's world, she was a participant. She attended Hollywood parties, visited sets, and was frequently in the company of Elvis's entourage. However, these experiences, while glamorous, only served to underline her isolation. She wasn't fully integrated into the world that Elvis moved through, nor did she entirely fit into her old life as a high school student. The relationship between Priscilla and Elvis began to develop in a way that was both intimate and strained. As Priscilla spent more time with Elvis, she began to see the dark side of his fame. Despite his public persona as the charismatic, confident king of rock and roll, behind closed doors, Elvis was struggling with personal demons, primarily loneliness and the pressures of his celebrity. In Elvis and Me, Priscilla described how she watched Elvis start to rely more heavily on prescription drugs. She witnessed how Elvis's emotional state would fluctuate drastically, swinging between high energy and deep depression. It became apparent to Priscilla that while Elvis was often surrounded by people, he still felt alone. And as she spent more time with him, she too began to feel the loneliness that came with being the girlfriend of a man so deeply entrenched in his fame. Despite these challenges, Priscilla remained deeply in love with Elvis. She had never known anyone quite like him. His charm, his vulnerability, and the deep affection he showed her kept her attached to him even when their relationship became difficult. In Elvis and Me, she wrote about the moments they shared, the private conversations, the times when Elvis made her feel like the only person in the room. For Priscilla, these moments were what kept her going, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. In 1963, Elvis returned to Hollywood to begin shooting the film Viva Las Vegas, a movie that would pair him with the rising star Anne Margaret. At the time, Priscilla was living in Memphis, and though Elvis had promised her he would stay faithful, Priscilla couldn't help but feel uneasy as the press began to circulate rumors about Elvis and Anne Margaret's off-screen relationship. In Elvis and Me, Priscilla recalled how, upon hearing about the growing media frenzy around Elvis and Anne Margaret, she became increasingly anxious. She wasn't in Hollywood, and the distance between her and Elvis made her feel even more vulnerable to the rumors. Priscilla knew that Elvis had always been surrounded by beautiful women, but seeing his relationship with Anne Margaret being splashed across magazine covers was a difficult pill to swallow. Despite her reservations, Priscilla decided she would visit him on set to confront him about the rumors. After several months of hearing nothing but excuses, she demanded to come to Hollywood. At first, Elvis seemed reluctant, but eventually he agreed. Priscilla arrived on the set of Viva Las Vegas and was immediately confronted by the paparazzi. However, her visit to the set didn't go as planned. On the final day of production, the press published an article claiming that Anne Margaret and Elvis were romantically involved and even engaged. The article was later refuted by Anne Margaret, who claimed that the interview had been fabricated by the press. But the damage was done. Priscilla, devastated by the allegations, was left to process her feelings. In Elvis and Me, she explained how she felt betrayed, even though Elvis had promised that there was nothing between him and Anne Margaret. Elvis attempted to calm Priscilla's concerns by assuring her that he had ended things with Anne Margaret and promised to never see her again. However, the reality was much different. Elvis continued to communicate with Anne Margaret secretly, further deepening Priscilla's suspicions and emotional turmoil. In the aftermath of the media frenzy, Elvis and Priscilla's relationship became strained. Though they tried to move past the incident, it was clear that trust had been damaged, and the cracks in their relationship were beginning to show. Priscilla's feelings of insecurity, combined with the pressures of their complicated lives, weighed heavily on her. In her autobiography, she openly discusses how at that point she began to question whether Elvis was truly committed to her. Despite the pain she felt, Priscilla was still in love with him, and she clung to the hope that things would improve. But deep down, she knew their relationship was changing, and that change wasn't necessarily for the better. As their love story continued, the intensity of their connection grew, but so did the difficulties they faced. In a world where fame, infidelity, and addiction played a major role, Priscilla and Elvis's relationship became increasingly difficult to navigate. What had started as a fairy tale romance was quickly becoming a complicated, painful journey. In many ways, Priscilla was torn between the love she had for Elvis and the toll that his fame, infidelity, and emotional turmoil were taking on her. The pressures of living in Elvis's world, coupled with her growing feelings of isolation and insecurity, created a storm of emotions that Priscilla was beginning to realize might be more than she could handle. By 1967, Priscilla Presley had been with Elvis for several years. They had experienced many highs and lows, but the overwhelming sense of pressure and scrutiny had begun to take its toll. Elvis was now one of the most famous men in the world, and Priscilla was not only dealing with the challenges of being in a relationship with him, but also the intense spotlight that came with being the wife of the king of rock and roll. Their relationship had been marked by intense emotions and deep affection, but also by strain, especially as Elvis's career continued to soar and his personal issues began to weigh more heavily on both of them. The couple was navigating a turbulent time, and Priscilla was increasingly finding herself struggling to balance her own needs with the demands of being married to a global icon. Priscilla and Elvis had been dating for almost 8 years when they finally decided to marry in a private ceremony in Las Vegas on May 1, 1967. In her autobiography, Elvis and Me, Priscilla recounts the whirlwind of emotions she felt during that time. Though she was excited about becoming Mrs. Elvis Presley, there was also a deep sense of unease. She was just 21, still very young and trying to figure out who she was, while also adapting to the world of fame and constant media attention that came with marrying one of the most famous men in the world. The wedding itself was a very private affair, as the couple wanted to avoid public attention. They entered the Aladdin Hotel through a back entrance to avoid the paparazzi, and the ceremony was attended by only a small group of people. Most of Elvis's close friends, including members of his famous entourage, were not invited. Despite the quiet nature of the wedding, the press was still able to capture photos, and the newlyweds were quickly thrust into the spotlight as the press clamored to get a glimpse of the couple's first moments as husband and wife. Priscilla had to adjust quickly to her new role as Elvis's wife. The honeymoon that followed was an extravagant one, with the couple flying in Frank Sinatra's private jet to Palm Springs, California. However, even on their honeymoon, the constant media attention made it difficult for Priscilla to truly relax and enjoy the time with her new husband. The couple was met with throngs of reporters and photographers wherever they went, and Priscilla couldn't escape the constant scrutiny that came with being married to Elvis. In Elvis and Me, Priscilla admits that during these early years of marriage, she often felt isolated. Though she loved Elvis deeply, she was still a young woman trying to find her identity. "I was still so young," she writes. "I didn't know who I was outside of being Elvis's wife. The pressure of being constantly in the spotlight and the demands of living up to the expectations of being married to him were overwhelming." It wasn't just the external pressures that were affecting their marriage. Elvis was also struggling with his own demons, including his growing dependency on prescription drugs and his emotional instability. As Priscilla became more immersed in Elvis's world, she began to notice how much his dependence on medication was affecting their relationship. Elvis had always been someone who struggled with feelings of loneliness, and his fame only seemed to exacerbate these feelings. Despite having a seemingly perfect life, Elvis was often caught in a cycle of highs and lows that would leave him emotionally distant and erratic. Priscilla, in turn, was caught in the middle of this turmoil. As she dealt with the demands of being a young wife, she also had to face the fact that Elvis was becoming more and more unpredictable. She described how he would often retreat into himself, leaving her feeling neglected and unsure of how to help him. The couple's relationship began to show signs of strain, even though they still cared deeply for each other. By 1968, Priscilla had given birth to their only child, Lisa Marie Presley, on February 1st. The arrival of their daughter brought some joy and happiness to their relationship, but it also added another layer of complexity. While Elvis doted on his daughter and was proud of being a father, the pressures of parenthood, combined with the ongoing issues in their marriage, continued to create tension between the couple. At this point, Priscilla was trying to balance her role as a mother, wife, and individual. She was still very much in the process of growing into herself, but she often felt like she was losing her sense of identity. In her autobiography, Priscilla described how she tried to focus on being a good mother and a supportive wife, but the constant presence of fame and the challenges it brought made it difficult for her to maintain a sense of self. Elvis, too, was struggling with his own identity. His career, which had once been a source of excitement and fulfillment, was starting to feel like a burden. By the late 1960s, Elvis's career was in a bit of a slump. His films were not performing as well at the box office, and he began to feel as though he was losing his place in the music industry. This feeling of dissatisfaction, combined with his reliance on drugs and alcohol, only served to exacerbate the problems in his personal life. As Priscilla continued to adjust to life as Elvis's wife, she began to realize that their marriage was far from perfect. In Elvis and Me, she writes that while she was deeply in love with Elvis, she was also beginning to feel the weight of the emotional distance that had formed between them. The carefree days of their early relationship seemed far behind them, replaced by a more complex and often painful reality. Elvis, despite his affection for Priscilla, was increasingly distracted by the pressures of his career and personal struggles. He continued to rely on drugs, and his physical and emotional health deteriorated. As Priscilla looked at their marriage, she started to question whether their relationship could survive the pressures of fame, addiction, and personal discontent. The external pressures, the constant public scrutiny, and the issues within their marriage led to a growing sense of isolation for both Priscilla and Elvis. While they continued to love each other, it became clear that their marriage was not the fairy tale it had once seemed to be. In fact, the years ahead would prove to be even more challenging for the couple, as they each struggled with their own personal battles. The love they shared was undeniable, but it was also complicated by the weight of their fame, their own personal insecurities, and the emotional distance that was growing between them. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Elvis and Priscilla's tumultuous yet captivating story. Their relationship, full of love, challenges, and the pressures of fame, reminds us that even the brightest stars have their struggles. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another chapter of this incredible journey. See you in the next video. The cameras flashed. The world cheered. The headlines painted the perfect picture: a king and his queen, Elvis and Priscilla's fairy tale wedding. But what if it wasn't a fairy tale? What if behind the glamour, the smiles, and the lavish celebration, the king of rock and roll was drowning in regret? To millions, this was the pinnacle of romance. The dashing rock star, the beautiful young bride, a wedding fit for royalty. Every moment, from the sleek black tuxedo to the breathtaking lace gown, was carefully documented and immortalized. Yet behind the polished facade lurked a devastating reality. While the world was enchanted by the love story unfolding before their eyes, Elvis himself was trapped in a moment he never truly wanted. The wedding, the vows, the grand reception, it all felt like a scripted performance rather than a celebration of love. For a man who built his life on charisma, freedom, and rebellion, the ceremony that was supposed to be the happiest day of his life was anything but. He stood beside Priscilla, smiling for the flashing cameras, yet inside he felt utterly powerless. The wedding itself was shockingly brief, just 8 minutes. For a man of Elvis's stature, a star who commanded the world's attention, such a fleeting ceremony seemed bizarre. Only 14 guests were present, a stark contrast to the grand spectacle the world had imagined. Even some of his closest friends, the ones who had been by his side through fame, fortune, and heartbreak, were conspicuously absent. Why? Why was an event of such magnitude reduced to a rushed, almost clinical exchange of vows? Why did the ceremony feel more like a transaction than a true declaration of love? Immediately after saying "I do," Elvis and Priscilla weren't whisked away to a private moment of celebration. Instead, they were thrust into a press conference facing an unrelenting media storm. Cameras clicked, reporters fired off questions, and the couple put on a flawless display of joy and affection. Every loving glance, every rehearsed answer, every affectionate touch, it all seemed orchestrated. The world saw a man deeply in love, a couple basking in the glow of their new life together. But what they didn't see was the truth hiding behind Elvis's eyes, a truth that would soon come to light in 5 devastating words. The celebration didn't stop with the vows. An extravagant breakfast reception followed, filled with music executives, Hollywood elite, and powerful industry figures. MGM, RCA, and William Morris executives mingled with family and friends, ensuring that the event was not just a personal affair, but a business move. The spectacle continued. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed through the room, and the newlyweds posed for endless photos. But beneath the dazzling display of wealth and romance, something was deeply wrong. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, the man who commanded audiences of thousands, sat quietly, lost in thought. The energy that once radiated from him, the effortless charm that made him a legend, was noticeably absent. There was only one person who truly saw what was happening behind the scenes. Alberta Holman, affectionately known as Alberta V5, was more than just a housekeeper at Graceland. She was a trusted confidant, a silent witness to both Elvis's happiest and most vulnerable moments. She had watched over him for years, tending to his home and his heart, always knowing when something was wrong. But nothing could have prepared her for what she found just hours before the wedding. Elvis Presley, the man who had the world at his feet, sat alone, his head in his hands, tears silently streaming down his face. Alberta hesitated before speaking. Finally, she asked the question that lingered in the air like an unspoken truth. Why don't you just call it off? A simple question. A question most men in his position could have answered without hesitation. After all, wasn't he the king? The man who set his own rules, lived by his own terms? If he was truly unhappy, why was he going through with it? Alberta waited. expecting him to shake his head, to make a joke, to find some way to lighten the moment. But instead he looked up at her, his face heavy with emotion, and whispered 5 words that sent a chill through the room. "I don't have a choice." 5 words, softly spoken, yet carrying the weight of a man who felt trapped. For a moment, the silence between them was deafening. Alberta had seen Elvis in moments of weakness before, but never like this. These weren't the words of a man about to embark on the happiest day of his life. These weren't the words of someone making a lifelong commitment out of love. They were the words of someone who was being pulled into something he had no power to resist. But how? How could Elvis Presley, the most famous entertainer in the world, adored by millions with wealth, power, and influence beyond imagination, feel so powerless? What force could possibly push him into a moment he so clearly did not want? And most importantly, if Elvis didn't have a choice, then who did? For years, Elvis Presley had been in control. He dictated his own path, bent the rules to his will, and lived by his own design. But when it came to this wedding, when it came to this moment, control was something he no longer had. Because behind the scenes, forces beyond his reach had been closing in, pressuring him toward a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. One of those forces was Priscilla's father, Captain Joseph Beaulieu. A strict military man, Joseph had long harbored concerns about his teenage daughter's relationship with the most famous entertainer in the world. For years, he had watched as Priscilla's life revolved around Elvis as she moved to Graceland at just 17, waiting patiently for a commitment that never came. By 1966, he had waited long enough. Rumors swirled that Joseph had drawn a hard line. Either Elvis made the relationship official or he would take legal action. Given the delicate circumstances of their early years together, it was a threat Elvis couldn't ignore. But Joseph Beaulieu wasn't the only one forcing Elvis's hand. Another man, one whose influence overshadowed nearly every major decision in Elvis's career, was pulling the strings from behind the curtain, Colonel Tom Parker. To Parker, marriage wasn't about love. It wasn't about personal happiness. It was about image. The Colonel knew that Elvis's reputation was everything. The world saw him as a heartthrob, a larger-than-life figure. A long-term, undefined relationship with a young woman, especially one who had moved in with him before marriage, could lead to scandal. And scandal in Parker's mind was bad for business. So he made it simple. Marry her or let her go. There could be no in-between, no more uncertainty, no more years of speculation. A proper wedding would solidify Elvis's image as a devoted husband, quelling any rumors before they could become a real problem. It would satisfy the press, calm public curiosity, and keep everything under control. But there was yet another possible factor at play: Priscilla herself. For years, she had been the hidden girlfriend of the most sought-after man on the planet. She had sacrificed her normal teenage years, her freedom, her life outside of Elvis's shadow. Was she really willing to risk losing everything if he walked away? Some speculated that she too had placed pressure on him, that she had warned Elvis that if he backed out, she wouldn't stay silent. There were details about their early years together, secrets that, if revealed to the press, could have caused a firestorm of controversy. Whether or not this was true didn't matter, because the fear of scandal was enough to push Elvis further into a corner. And so the stage was set. The wedding went ahead. The world celebrated. The cameras captured a dazzling display of romance. But behind closed doors, the reality was far different. Because even after saying "I do," Elvis's troubles were far from over. In fact, his heartbreak was only just beginning. Elvis and Priscilla had said their vows. The cameras had captured every moment. The press had declared their love story a dream come true, and the world had accepted the illusion. Now it was time for their honeymoon, a moment meant to solidify their bond, to mark the beginning of their life together. But something was off. Unlike the grand, extravagant honeymoons that most celebrities of their stature indulged in, Elvis and Priscilla's honeymoon was startlingly brief. Just 3 days in Palm Springs. It was rushed, almost obligatory. There were no long romantic getaways, no leisurely trips through Europe, no secluded island retreat, no time spent simply enjoying each other's presence away from the public eye. Instead, it felt like yet another carefully controlled part of the narrative, another performance, another scene in a play that Elvis had no choice but to act in. The honeymoon wasn't the start of a beautiful new chapter. It was a continuation of the same routine. And then, just weeks after the wedding, everything changed. Priscilla discovered she was pregnant. Most newlyweds would have celebrated this news. It would have been a joyful confirmation of their love, a sign of a future filled with family and happiness. But for Elvis, it wasn't joy he felt. It was something else entirely, something darker. Priscilla had always been a source of comfort, someone he could mold, someone who represented a youthful innocence that he cherished. But now, in his eyes, she had become something else, something unfamiliar. She was no longer just the young, devoted girlfriend who had waited for him all those years. She was about to become a mother, and that changed everything. Elvis had always struggled with complex views on intimacy, relationships, and love. The idea of Priscilla carrying his child seemed to shift the entire dynamic of their relationship overnight. He became distant, cold, detached in a way that Priscilla had never experienced before. The man who had once controlled every aspect of her life, who dictated how she dressed, how she spoke, how she moved, now barely seemed to see her at all. And as the months passed, that emotional distance only grew deeper. At first, Priscilla tried to ignore it. She told herself it was the stress of the pregnancy, the pressures of fame, the weight of everything Elvis was dealing with. But deep down, she knew. Something between them had shifted, and no matter what she did, she couldn't bring Elvis back to her. The man she had loved, the man she had waited for, the man she had finally married. He was slipping away. Nights that were once filled with laughter and conversation became long and silent. The intimate moments they had shared in their early years became increasingly rare. And when Elvis did seek comfort, it wasn't from her. He threw himself into his work, immersing himself in music, films, and relentless schedules that kept him away from home. When he wasn't working, he surrounded himself with his entourage, his friends, his bodyguards, the people who made him feel like the king of rock and roll. And then there were the other women. For years, rumors had followed Elvis about his infidelities, but now they were impossible for Priscilla to ignore. He no longer tried to hide them. The emotional walls between them had grown so high that it was as if he didn't care. Priscilla, once the center of his world, now felt like an outsider in her own marriage. She had given him everything: her youth, her devotion, her love. She had done everything he had ever asked of her, and yet it still wasn't enough. Years later, she would reflect on this painful realization in one haunting confession. Elvis had a hard time dealing with me being a mother. It was as if the very thing that should have brought them closer, their child, had instead created an irreversible wedge between them. The cracks in their marriage had appeared just weeks after the wedding. Now they were deepening, and soon they would reach the breaking point. By 1972, the illusion was impossible to maintain. For years, Priscilla had lived in the shadow of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the man the world adored. She had waited for him, shaped herself into what he wanted, played the role of the devoted wife. But the truth was undeniable. Their marriage had never been the fairy tale the world believed it to be. The distance between them had grown unbearable. The man she had once clung to now felt like a stranger, lost in a world of excess, distractions, and fleeting affairs. The love that had once bound them together had been replaced by coldness, resentment, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. Elvis, for all his fame, fortune, and power, was slipping further into his own private turmoil. He had become restless, erratic, trapped in a cycle of self-destruction that no one, not even Priscilla, could break him out of. She had given him a home, a family, a child, but she had never truly had his heart. And so after years of struggling to hold on, she made the decision that would change everything. She walked away. It wasn't easy. How do you leave a man the world worships? How do you walk away from someone who had been your entire life since you were a teenager? But Priscilla knew the truth. Staying meant continuing to live in a marriage where she felt unseen, unloved, and unfulfilled. She wanted something more, something real. The divorce was finalized in 1973, marking the official end of their marriage. The carefully crafted illusion of their perfect love story came crashing down. Yet in reality, the cracks had been there from the very beginning. Elvis's whispered words on the eve of their wedding, "I don't have a choice," had been a prophecy. A silent truth buried beneath the weight of expectation, obligation, and pressure. He had never truly chosen this life, and in the end, neither had Priscilla. Their love story had begun in secrecy, blossomed under the constraints of fame, and unraveled under the weight of everything that came with being Elvis Presley's wife. The world had seen a fairy tale, But behind the cameras, behind the headlines, behind the carefully staged romance, there had only ever been two people desperately trying and failing to hold on to something that had never been real. And so Elvis and Priscilla parted ways, but the echoes of their love, their pain, and their heartbreak would linger forever. After the divorce, the world expected Elvis to move on effortlessly. He was still the king of rock and roll, still adored by millions, still a man who could have anything he wanted. But something had changed. For years, he had kept Priscilla at a distance, shutting her out, allowing their marriage to wither away. And yet, the moment she was truly gone, an emptiness settled in. He had spent his life being worshipped, surrounded by people who would do anything for him. But for all the admiration and devotion he received, there was only one person who had ever truly been his, Priscilla. And now, she belonged to someone else. At first, he tried to bury the pain. He continued to perform, continued to charm audiences, continued to be Elvis Presley. But those closest to him saw the shift. His energy was different. His performances lacked the fire they once had. The man who had once ruled the stage with an effortless swagger now seemed weighed down by something unseen. And then there were the nights, the long, lonely nights. Without Priscilla, without a home that felt whole, he surrounded himself with people, yet remained deeply alone. He sought comfort in distractions, in fleeting romances, in reckless indulgences, in anything that could temporarily numb the ache of what he had lost. But nothing worked. He watched from afar as Priscilla built a new life, one without him. She found love again, regained her independence, and slowly stepped out of the shadow he had kept her in for so many years. And for the first time, Elvis understood something he had never admitted before. It was never about whether or not he loved Priscilla. He had loved her in his own way, in the only way he knew how. But love was never the foundation of their marriage. It had been built on expectation, on obligation, on forces beyond their control. And when it ended, Elvis was left to face a truth he had long ignored. He had spent his life being adored by the world, but in the end, he had lost the one person who had loved him not as a legend, not as an icon, but simply as a man. As the years passed, the weight of regret, of loneliness, of all the choices he had never truly made settled deeper into his soul. And as his life spiraled further into excess, as his health declined, as the sparkle in his eyes began to fade, one truth remained. The king of rock and roll could have anything he wanted, except for the one thing he had lost forever, her. Elvis Presley was more than just a musician. He was a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of fame, power, and desire. But behind the dazzling performances and the worldwide adoration, he was a man fighting battles no one could see. His marriage to Priscilla had been presented as a love story for the ages, but in reality, it was a carefully constructed illusion. One built on pressure, obligation, and a destiny he never truly had control over. The words he whispered on the eve of his wedding, "I don't have a choice," were not just a reflection of that moment. They were a reflection of his entire life. And in the years that followed, as his marriage crumbled, as his health declined, as he drifted further from the man he once was, those 5 words would echo louder than ever. So now, we turn the question to you. Was Elvis Presley ever truly in love with Priscilla? Or was their marriage nothing more than a performance for the world? Did he ever have a real choice? Or was he simply playing a role that had been written for him long before he ever said, "I do"? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most shocking moments of Elvis's life, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.
I guess. And then he died 8 months later, and I didn't see him for those 8 months. We spoke on the phone, but I didn't see him. And he really had deteriorated it a lot.
Have you ever wondered if Elvis Presley's heart ever truly moved on from Priscilla? He was the king of rock and roll, a man adored by millions. Yet behind the dazzling lights and roaring crowds, there was a story rarely told. A story of love loss and lingering emotion. What if I told you that even after his high-profile divorce from Priscilla Presley, there was an unspoken connection that never truly faded? And what if someone close to him, someone who loved him deeply, was forced to face the truth about his divided heart? This is the story of Linda Thompson, the woman who stood by Elvis's side during some of the most challenging years of his life. Their love was real, passionate, and deeply connected, but there was always something lingering in the shadow, the ghost of Priscilla. For years, Linda saw signs that told her Elvis's past wasn't entirely in the past. She accepted them. She loved him despite them. But one moment, one unexpected confession changed everything she thought she understood about their relationship. In this video, we uncover that hidden moment. The words Elvis spoke to Linda that proved his love for Priscilla never truly left. To understand the depth of Elvis's emotions, we need to first understand the woman who shared his world after Priscilla, Linda Thompson. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, Linda wasn't just another admirer of Elvis. She was a beauty queen, crowned Miss Tennessee in 1972, and had an undeniable charm that captivated those around her. But her life changed forever when she crossed paths with the biggest icon in music history. It was a summer night in 1972 when Linda was invited to a private gathering at the Memphian Theater, a place Elvis often rented out to watch movies with his inner circle. When their eyes met for the first time, there was an instant spark. Elvis, still recovering from his divorce, was drawn to Linda's warmth and kindness. She wasn't just beautiful, she had a gentle soul, a comforting presence, something he desperately needed. From that night on, their relationship blossomed. She became more than a girlfriend, she was his emotional anchor. She accompanied him on tours, stayed at Graceland, and experienced the whirlwind lifestyle of a rock and roll legend. But beyond the private jets and luxurious nights at Graceland, there was a truth Linda couldn't ignore. She soon realized that being with Elvis meant sharing him with his past. And no matter how deeply he cared for her, the presence of Priscilla Presley loomed over their relationship like a shadow. And it wasn't just about co-parenting Lisa Marie, it was something more, something deeper. It wasn't until one particular request from Elvis that Linda finally saw it for what it truly was. And that moment, it changed everything. For the outside world, Elvis Presley was the king, a larger-than-life figure draped in rhinestone-studded jumpsuits, adored by millions. But behind closed doors, he was a man struggling with loneliness, insecurities, and the weight of his own legacy. And Linda Thompson, she became his rock. She wasn't just another girlfriend in a long line of admirers, she was the woman who cared for him when the curtains closed, when the spotlights faded, when the crowds disappeared. From the very start, Linda realized that being with Elvis meant far more than just romance. It meant understanding his pain, his past, and his emotional wounds. She traveled with him everywhere, on tour, to Las Vegas, and of course back to Graceland. She saw his struggles with health, his dependence on prescription medications, and his emotional highs and lows. She took care of him in ways few ever could. But there was one thing Linda couldn't take away: the hold that Priscilla still had on his heart. Even though their marriage had officially ended in 1973, Elvis and Priscilla remained deeply connected. And it wasn't just because of their daughter, Lisa Marie. There were moments, whispers, glances that told Linda something she didn't want to admit. Elvis still had lingering feelings for his ex-wife. It wasn't just in the way he talked about Priscilla, it was in the way he held on to things from their past, reminisced about their time together, and reacted whenever Priscilla's name came up. At first, Linda brushed it off. She told herself that it was natural. They had a child together after all. But then came the night when Elvis made a request so personal, so revealing that it shattered every illusion Linda had about where she truly stood in his heart. Was it love, or was it unfinished business? The bond between Elvis and Priscilla Presley was complicated. Though their marriage had officially ended, something undeniable still tied them together. Linda had always known that Elvis and Priscilla shared a history that no one could erase, but she didn't expect to see just how deep that connection still ran. Elvis spoke of Priscilla often, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with frustration, but always with emotion. He would talk about their early years, about Graceland's happiest moments, about the way Priscilla used to laugh, the way she understood him. There was a softness in his voice whenever he mentioned her. But what truly opened Linda's eyes was Priscilla's presence in his life. Even after their divorce, Priscilla would visit Graceland. She and Elvis would have private conversations, ones that Linda was never invited into. There were moments when Linda felt like an outsider looking in, standing in the shadow of a love story that had never fully ended. And then came the moment that changed everything. One night, as Linda prepared for an evening out with Elvis, she reached for a beautiful bracelet, a gift he had given her. But as soon as Elvis saw it on her wrist, his expression changed. And what he said next left Linda questioning everything. Linda had dressed carefully that evening, selecting an elegant outfit and finishing her look with a bracelet that Elvis had given her, a stunning piece of jewelry shimmering under the light. But when Elvis noticed it, his face changed. His usual playful charm faded into something more serious. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Don't wear that," he said, his voice softer than usual. Linda frowned, confused. It was a gift from him. Why would he ask her not to wear it? "Why?" she asked, searching his face for an answer. Elvis exhaled and ran a hand through his hair as if debating whether to tell her the truth. "Because I gave one just like it to Priscilla," he finally admitted. The words hit Linda like a wave. She had always known that Priscilla was a part of Elvis's past, but at that moment she realized something deeper. Priscilla wasn't just his past. She was still a part of him. It wasn't just about a bracelet. It was about what it represented. Elvis didn't want Linda wearing something that reminded him of Priscilla. It was as if the sight of it was too much for him to bear. Linda felt a sting of realization. No matter how much Elvis loved her, no matter how deeply she cared for him, there was a piece of him that would forever belong to Priscilla. She didn't argue. She simply removed the bracelet and placed it back in its box. But in her heart, she knew things would never feel the same again. Up until that moment, Linda had only heard about Priscilla from Elvis and his circle. But when she finally met her in person, it was a moment she would never forget. It happened at Elvis's home in California, a casual gathering where Priscilla arrived with their daughter, Lisa Marie. Linda felt a nervous tension in the air, an unspoken understanding between two women who had loved the same man. When Priscilla walked in, she was composed, graceful, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had once stood exactly where Linda was standing now. She wasn't cold, she wasn't rude. In fact, she was polite, even warm. But there was something in her eyes, something Linda couldn't quite describe. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't resentment. It was understanding. Linda realized that Priscilla knew exactly what it meant to love Elvis. She had been there. She had lived it. And now, she was watching someone else step into the same whirlwind. The conversation was pleasant, even friendly, but there was an unspoken truth between them. No matter how different their roles were now, they were forever connected through Elvis. As Priscilla left that evening, Linda felt a strange mix of emotions. She had met the woman who had once been Elvis's greatest love, and yet in that moment, she couldn't shake the feeling that a part of her still was. What Linda didn't realize was that Priscilla had her own feelings about the situation, and the next time they would cross paths, it wouldn't be so easy. Because it was Lisa Marie, Elvis's daughter, who would unknowingly reveal the truth about how Priscilla really felt. Children have a way of speaking the truth without realizing the weight of their words. And for Linda, it was Lisa Marie's innocent remark that revealed what Priscilla really thought about her. It happened on a quiet afternoon at Graceland. Linda had grown close to Lisa, treating her with kindness and love whenever she visited. She never wanted the little girl to feel like she was caught in the middle of something complicated. But children pick up on things. That day, as they sat together, Lisa Marie looked up at Linda with her bright, curious eyes and said something that made her heart stop. "My mommy doesn't like you." Linda blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She tried to keep her expression neutral. "Why do you say that, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Lisa shrugged, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "She just doesn't." There was no malice in Lisa's voice, just honesty. Linda felt a strange sensation creeping over her. Up until now, she had assumed that Priscilla saw her as just another chapter in Elvis's life, but now, she realized something different. Priscilla might have been graceful and polite in person, but behind closed doors, she harbored feelings about Linda that she had kept hidden. Was it resentment? Was it protectiveness? Or was it something deeper, a lingering pain from a love that had never fully faded? Linda knew that Elvis and Priscilla's relationship was complicated, but this was the first time she felt the weight of it in her own life. Lisa, unaware of the impact her words had made, continued playing as if nothing had happened. But for Linda, everything had changed, because now she knew that Priscilla still cared. And when a love as powerful as the one she and Elvis had shared refuses to die, what does that mean for the woman who came after? The deeper Linda fell into Elvis's world, the more she realized he was a man of contradictions. He loved fiercely, yet he struggled to let go. He sought comfort in the present, yet he lived in the past. His relationship with Priscilla was over, yet she never truly left his heart. Linda had seen it firsthand. The way he reacted when Priscilla was mentioned, the way he spoke about their memories together. And now, thanks to Lisa Marie, she knew that Priscilla wasn't indifferent to him either. But where did that leave Linda? She had given Elvis her heart. She had stood by his side through the highs and lows, the chaotic tours, the sleepless nights. She had loved him in a way few ever could, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that a part of him would always belong to someone else. It wasn't that he didn't love Linda. He did. She could feel it in his embrace, in the way he depended on her, in the moments of tenderness they shared. But love isn't always enough when the past refuses to let go. Linda started noticing little things. The way Elvis would sometimes drift into silence after a conversation about Priscilla. The way certain songs seemed to take him somewhere else. The way his mood would shift after a visit from his ex-wife. She realized that he was a man caught between two worlds. He had the life he had built with Linda, filled with companionship and understanding. And he had the past he had shared with Priscilla, filled with history and unfinished emotions. And in the end, Elvis himself didn't seem to know where he truly belonged. This was the reality of being with a man like him. Loving him meant accepting that part of him would always be elsewhere. And for Linda, the question was, how long could she live with that? Because sooner or later, a woman who loves a man must ask herself, if his heart is split between two people, is it really yours at all? Elvis Presley was more than just a cultural icon. He was a man torn between duty and desire, past and present, love and loss. For Linda Thompson, loving him meant accepting the contradictions, the tender moments and the distant ones, the devotion and the ghosts of his past. But the truth was, Elvis himself was struggling. He loved Linda. He relied on her. He leaned on her when his world became too overwhelming. She was his sanctuary, his calm in the storm. And yet Priscilla never fully faded from his life. Somewhere deep inside him, Elvis held on to a version of love that no longer existed, but one he couldn't fully let go of. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was something more. A longing for the life he had once built with Priscilla, the woman who had once been his wife, the mother of his child. Linda had seen it all. The moments when Elvis was fully present with her, and the moments when he seemed lost in a world of his own, a world where she could never quite reach him. And that was the hardest part of all, because loving Elvis meant understanding that a part of him would never belong to her completely. It meant standing beside a man whose heart was divided. It meant realizing that no matter how much she loved him, she might never be the only one he truly loved. And for a woman who had given her heart so completely, that truth was almost too much to bear. What would Linda do next? Would she stay, knowing she would always live in the shadow of another love? Or would she finally choose herself?
For years, Linda Thompson had been Elvis Presley's rock, his caretaker, his closest companion. She had stood by him through the sleepless nights, the emotional highs and lows, the struggles he rarely let the world see. She had loved him with every piece of her heart. But in the end, love wasn't enough. Linda knew that no matter how much she gave, Elvis's heart was never fully hers to hold. A part of him was still connected to Priscilla, to a past he couldn't let go of. And so she made the hardest choice of all. She chose herself. In 1976, after 4 years by his side, Linda walked away. Not because she didn't love him, but because she knew she deserved to be loved completely. It was painful. It was heartbreaking. But it was necessary. Because sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is let go of a love that isn't truly hers. Elvis Presley's story is one of music, fame, and larger-than-life moments. But behind the legend was a man who struggled with love, loss, and the weight of his own past. Linda Thompson's story is often overshadowed by the history of Elvis and Priscilla, but her role in his life was undeniable. She was there in his final years. She was the woman who cared for him when the world wasn't watching, and in the end, she was the one who had to walk away. But what if Elvis had made a different choice? What if he had truly moved on from Priscilla? Would his story and his fate have been different? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories from the life of the King of Rock and Roll.